I forget how many years back it goes now, but it's been a while. We have recognized, as everybody does, that treatments may or may not have a large effect on reducing health disparities in our country, or reducing health inequity, depending on how you want to frame it. And that that may not kind of come obviously out of the clinical trial results. You just have to think of what the effect is going to be in clinical practice, and which communities will this drug be particularly helpful. And it may be racial disparities, but it could be rural versus urban, because some treatments might be really helpful to be able to get out to people in rural communities, and therefore kind of reduce disparities of rural versus urban patients. And in this case, we, as always, wanted to highlight whether there might be particular advantages to the new treatments that would have, again, the ability to expand treatment into communities that might not have great uptake, or serve other purposes in ways that would help us reduce health inequities. So we do talk about it in our reports. We talk about it at our public meetings, and our independent committees that we convene to kind of vote on the evidence. We have them take a specific vote on several different kind of contextual factors, one of which is whether the treatment is likely to have a significant effect on reducing health inequity, because we really want that message to get into the usual discussion around value that payers and others will have when they think about new treatments. I think we did hear, and we had one clinician expert at the table who specifically has spent his life kind of helping to serve underserved communities, especially in the Black community. And we heard from him that he thought that it would be for many patients that he would care for an advantage to be able to administer the drug there in the doctor's office, and not have to rely on them getting new prescriptions and kind of that process, which is hard for all patients to a certain extent. But we spent a fair amount of time just talking about how to launch this kind of new treatment in a way that wouldn't increase disparities. In other words, often we find that when a new treatment's available, it first goes to people who are really plugged into academic health centers or have other ways of finding out about new treatments. So we talked a lot about how do we get the word out that people should be checking their cholesterol? How do we get the word out that statin drugs are the first line of care and are for most patients incredibly effective and helpful? Because there's already a huge unmet need, if you will, just on that end of the scale, even before you get to the more advanced treatment options for the patients who still need them. So we talked a lot about, again, rollouts through community centers, different ways to make sure that patients are informed and educated and involved in the decision-making around what treatment is best for them. So that's part of our report, and actually part of our mission as well, is not just to think about the fair price, but how do we think about what fair access would be, and how do we make sure that that access is fair across all different kinds of communities?
Nonetheless, is kind of, A1 in this discussion. And the press release about this report, you talked about not squandering an opportunity here, that there are been some innovations in treatment of high cholesterol that is either resistant to statins, or people who, or in people who can't tolerate statins, and that price can sort of undo the effect of innovation. So I guess I'm curious what you meant by squandering. You used that word, we got to be careful here about not squandering an opportunity. What were you thinking about?
Well, this kind of connects back to the very first question when we were talking about around what happened with the PCSK9 inhibitors. So we have innovation leading to a treatment that really does address an important unmet need. And yet we all should just be aware that price and access are just linked at the hip. And we just can't assume that a price that's not viewed as fair, that's not viewed as well aligned with the benefit to patients, isn't going to have an adverse effect on people's ability to get that treatment. And it did feel that the first few years after PCSK9 inhibitors came out, that there was an opportunity squandered then because of all the friction and the difficulty of patients and doctors to prescribe it. And certainly the companies felt like their uptake and their revenue wasn't good. And I'm not even sure that payers really, nobody viewed that as a win. I don't think anybody did. It was almost like a hard lesson that had to be relearned in order to maybe get it right the next time around. So that's what Let's Don't Squander This Next Opportunity was about. We have another new important treatment option, bempedoic acid as well, that can help certain patients. Let's not squander it. Let's try to get the pricing fairly aligned. Let's get the health system to welcome the use of these in appropriate patients. And if we can get the price aligned at the front end, that just gets the ball rolling in the right direction.
Good, good. Well, I think maybe we should leave it there. So thank you very much. So that's the end of the formal part of the interview. I should know this, but I was confused about something, and I just read the summary. I didn't have time to go through the whole 213 pages.
Peter, I'm so distressed you didn't read the whole thing, really.
So where does the 819 million figure come from, and the fact that we're talking that? Yeah, I'm confused about that.
It is actually hard. That's hard to understand. I'll try to give you the elevator version of it. So, and actually PCSK9s or hepatitis C drugs are not a bad example. Sometimes we have drugs that are great long-term value at a certain price. But if we have 10 million Americans who need the treatment tomorrow, and we have to spend all that money right now, it's just going to be a huge budget impact in the short term to get that long-term value. And we at least need to keep our eye on that, because if that could mean that we actually need even a lower price, even a fair price for the long term might need to be lower if we're going to be able to afford it in the short term. Or maybe we need to stretch out the payments or figure out how to treat something first. That's what that 819 million is an attempt to use the anticipated growth in the overall US economy and say, if we're going to have a fair amount of drug spending as part of that going forward, how much could this new drug gobble up in new spending before we start to push the budget warning signs? I guess it's a rough estimate.
Yeah, it's sort of the cost of the drug by the times the number of people who use
in the short term. And it's a short-term measure as opposed to what we usually focus on, which is the long-term value.
But I was struck that at that price, 5,644, that you would hit the 819 figure with just 4.5% of the, I wasn't sure what the eligible patients were. That would suggest that 1 out of 20 people who might benefit from this drug, that if you started to prescribe, if you started to really get over that 1 out of 20, it would start to have a budget impact that you'd have to lower the price.
So the reason we put it out that way is because we're not actually saying that only 4% should be treated and then you should stop, or you should keep the price down so that you can treat everybody necessarily all at once. We're just saying, we got a potential issue here that we still have to talk about. Even if we think that price at 5,600 is fair, do we think in the short term we are going to try to treat more than 5%? If we are, what do we want? And maybe this is the drug in which we say, fine, we're going to blow the budget and spend it all right here, but maybe we need to save it somewhere else. It's just to kind of get people thinking. So what doesn't happen is the other way to squander this opportunity, which is that we have a good drug and it's even reasonably priced for the long term, but payers still think it's too expensive in the short term on the budget impact. And so they still put the difficult kind of tightening.
They still make access difficult because
we're trying to avoid that too.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that was a nice discrete thing. Novartis called me when I wrote a story about inclisiran in the recent past, and they very much did not want it to be considered a PCKS9 inhibitor. And I gather that's for formulary reasons. So I didn't quite know what to say. I thought, well, I guess you're right, but I wasn't I don't know what to say.
Well, we did raise the question of whether a formulary might say, well, you only need one or the other. You don't need both, because they both kind of do the same thing. And if I can get a cheaper price on a PCSK9, maybe, and they want me to exclude inclisiran from the formulary, maybe I'll do that. And obviously Novartis doesn't want the negotiations to run in that direction. They want to be the only drug in their field so that the payers can't say we got something better over here with PCSK9s. And I understand that. I understand.
Okay. Well, thanks. Like I say, this is going to manifest itself in several ways. So
great, Peter. Thank you. And actually, we're writing new report formats these days that have a lovely 2-page executive summary, and the whole reports are around 30 to 35 pages. So we're listening to you, Peter.
We're trying to make your life easier.
It can be a bit daunting, but then, you know, it's like any executive summary, it's like, oh, I don't quite understand that. But so, you know, it's just the decay that happens with summary is the information, the decay that happens with summary can present its own issues. So
you're right.
So David, it'd be great if you could send the audio to me toot sweet. So I have it here, but it might be better in that format. So thank you.
Okay. Well, thank
Peter,
you, and
thank you
I'll follow up with you. Yep.
All right, bye.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.